Well, I did promise that I was going to review this movie in November, and since that we're finally in November, and after doing Summerpalooza 5, Steven Universe Marathon, and Halloween Mania 2, this video was long overdue, with this movie being almost 5 months old, but at the same time, I really have mixed opinions towards this movie, considering that the first time I talked about this movie was back in April, while they released the poster, while I made the video displayed I'm not interested, considering I'm not into spy elements. And mainly the fact that I'm burned out from the Loud House, but considering that I don't want to wait any longer for this review to come out somewhere in the future, that could be in 2025 or possibly after that, today is the best opportunity to make a review out of this movie, considering that this movie would have been something else entirely in my perspective, but at the same time, it still have some issues. Like, don't get me wrong, this is not a terrible movie. I just couldn't get into it as much as other people did when they say that this movie is the best Loud House movie than the first movie and the Casagrande movie. And when it comes to the key elements of one of the characters, mainly Margo being a spy that Lincoln is so obsessed with, and the fact that I'm fully aware that the people who worked on this movie were huge fans of spy elements and James Bond's homage, I really feel like that this movie has more passion than it needed to have than I thought, but at the end of the day, I still couldn't be able to get into the execution of any of those elements. Let's get the main character out of the way. While Lincoln is so obsessed with David Steely and spy elements to the point that he is so obsessed that he almost forgot about the wedding rings, all the while that he is dreaming of the spy elements happening on the island that his family are going to when it comes to the wedding of his grandpa and Margo, to the point it got in the way. The thing is that this type of material would have been justified when it comes to Lincoln's obsession, but if you remember of how much I wasn't really into his obsession with David Steely in the main series, it kind of makes me to believe that they're literally trying way too hard to give him a flaw. I'm not saying it's unrealistic for a character like Lincoln to have this obsession that gets to his head, because it did happen in other shows, including great ones. But at the same time, I don't think that this type of flaw really works in Lincoln's character, considering of what he experienced in past seasons of this show. All and A Savvy are examples that Lincoln's obsession just isn't over the top, and I'm really convinced that All is literally the place where Lincoln should have realized that what happens in reality isn't the same as he thinks. Granted, the entire message of the Season 2 episode of All is to showcase that Clyde is upset that anything that he thought that he saw when it comes to the All series was real, but at the same time, it turns out to be mostly fake. And whenever I look at this episode, thinking about this movie in particular, it really gave me the understanding that the kid characters can have the obsession go too far, but in Clyde's case, there's a limit where he just drops everything to the point that he isn't heartbroken. Like, he is heartbroken, but at the same time, in a way, well, it shows that these kids are actually matured. Granted, they're not really matured, but matured to understand that all these isn't real, but considering that it's shown that this episode, well, ghosts are real, that's a different story entirely. And when it comes to A Savvy, in the Season 3 episode Deal Me Out, it really shows that they're really taking the characters seriously when it comes to them being humorous when it comes to the obsession, but at the same time, when they got older, they understand that they need to do different things, but no matter what they do, they always go back to Ace Savvy. That kind of really makes me think that whenever I look at these elements in past seasons, it kind of makes Lincoln's obsession towards spies a little too over the top. Even if this show is infamous when it comes to the characters go back to square one multiple times, I just find it difficult to see Lincoln in this position when it comes to spies being so much to him to the point that it's a way for this story to continue, because even if you like it or not, I just don't feel like that Lincoln is the type of character that really works in this role when it comes to his character development, when it comes to his other hobbies. And whenever you look at his other hobbies, it really shows that if you just leave those hobbies out of it and just view this character, mainly Lincoln, as its own character, it really gave me the assumption that the people who are working on the show without Chris Savino in a way are trying to build up their own Lincoln in the newer seasons, which I try to understand, but considering that the newer seasons isn't a reboot of the first 3 seasons and everything is connected, it just kind of makes all this difficult to take in seriously. Okay, you're not going to like what I'm about to say when it comes to Mortal in this movie, but it needs to be said. I'm not a fan of her being a spy because it doesn't really fit her character for how she was developed in Season 3. Yes, there is the Season 6 episode that I will talk about soon, but watching Mortal from this movie from beginning to end, I didn't really enjoy her character to the point that it's difficult to take her new development of used to be an undercover spy seriously, because it really derails of what she was in Season 3, since that episode was more than half of a decade old, and then when we got to the Season 6 episode, it just made me think that her life being alone doesn't really feel that lonely in how she was portrayed. Her portrayal in Season 6. In Season 3 of her debut, I really admire her character to the point that she tries everything to make me convinced that she wants to fit in with the Loud family when it comes to her relationship with Lincoln's grandpa. But considering of what they did with her in Season 6, it really makes everything that we've seen in her debut episode difficult to take her problems seriously, because when this was around the time where Chris Savino was running the show, it made me convinced that she was so alone that she had nothing to gain when it comes to her life, and what the Loud siblings did was selfish, even if they do have good intentions. But learning more about her life when it comes to her being alone, it made me convinced that the Loud siblings looked at their wrongdoings and decides to give Moto a chance in order to be part of the family. And even though it's been a while since we last saw her when it comes to Seasons 4 and 5 up until Season 6, I was honestly looking forward to see her return, but when she did return, it's really difficult to take her character seriously. I'm just saying, the Season 6 episode when it comes to Pop Up the Question, I really wanted to find the surprise factor of what made this episode one of the greatest episodes of Season 6, but this episode really derailed of what made Moto's character great in Season 3, and even if you are still into her character, for me personally, it just makes me feel like that whole life being alone wasn't really all that lonely, considering that she was a secret agent, and the superstition that the Loud siblings are thinking when it comes to what Moto might do to Pop. Honestly, it's mainly another Season 6 episode that really rubbed me the wrong way to take the Loud siblings seriously, but that's a topic for another day. pop up the question is supposed to be a showcase of what Mortal really is, but at the same time, it also dwells of how her loneliness just isn't all that lonely considering that she used to be a secret agent. I would probably give her the benefit of the doubt if she retired decades ago and she's trying to find solutions to move on with her life. But this would have made a little bit more sense if she wasn't a spy that does contain her being completely lonely, all the while just understanding of how her life being way more alone than anyone else would make me feel sympathy a lot more in the season 3 episodes. Because every time I think of Moto in the Spy as a spy in the Loud House No Time to Spy movie, it just makes me think that she should have been a different character that would have made Lincoln's obsession a lot more accurate. I would really wanted to see the dynamic between Lincoln and Morto in this, but at the same time, the spy elements when it comes to my issues involving these two characters just don't really fit the whole family theme, and even if Morto is retired as a spy, honestly, the plan from the villains, which I'm gonna get to soon, it's a lose-lose situation if Lincoln didn't give in on his obsession when it comes to what is happening on the island while him and his family arrived. But before we get to the villain, let's go talk about the supporting characters. First with the Loud Sisters. In the first Loud House movie, the major criticisms that I have towards that movie is that the Loud siblings, mainly the sisters, were mostly tools that they're supposed to be a factor, but they didn't even capitalize on that to make me see that Lincoln is mostly in the wrong. In this movie, they're not really tools since that they don't contribute a lot to the plot aside from their attributes towards the end when it comes to getting inside the base. I will admit that they do fit the role a lot more better in this than how they were in the Loud House movie, to the point that their mini-plot involving the employee disguised by Morto that Morto wants in order to find Lincoln is somewhat heartwarming despite the ending where the Loud siblings kick them out of the limbo after finding out. But I have to admit that they were a lot more better than how they were developed in the Loud House movie, considering that with them being mostly people enjoying their time before the wedding their wives, they're basically doing their own thing by having joy going around, even though that they're talking to the wrong mortal. And to give this movie more credit, they're not as mean-spirited as they were from the movie, and some aspects were mostly of the aspects from the TV series. Granted, there are some bits and pieces here and there in this movie, but at the end of the day, they're a lot more better than how they were developed in the Loud House movie. So I'm not going to give them a hard time considering that they actually have more of a reason to enjoy their time on the island that they arrived rather than doing something important towards the plot, aside from their attributes towards the end before the climax. But then again, the climax towards the end is questionable, but we're gonna get to that later. The action scenes in this, I have to admit, they're really good. Even if I'm not on board with Lincoln's obsession all the while Morto being a spy, and the whole spy elements just isn't my thing, I have to admit that the action sequences in this movie are done really well, especially when the Loud family get inside the base in order to get the bottom of this, all the while rescuing Morto. I feel like that whenever they do these types of elements by having the characters work together, it's something that should have happened in the Loud House movie while the characters are close. And since that these characters are closer when it comes to how they're much more developed than how they were from the Loud Test movie, it made me feel like that they're actually close as a family when it comes to this type of scenario. And to give the spy element some credit, the groundedness of it all really showcases that this is the type of elements that somehow works in the Loud Test universe, even if it could have been a lot more executed in a way where it doesn't center around Lincoln's obsession and Moto being a spy. It's annoying, sure, but at the same time, there are all ways to make this spy movie work. And considering it's humorous to see the other characters who aren't Lincoln going through these scenarios of hiding in order to rescue Moto, you have to admit that the humor isn't always a miss when it comes to aspects like this. I really feel like that it's honestly a good thing that these characters aren't selfish, all the while willing to do what's right for the family, because if they were selfish, I'm pretty sure that this entire movie wouldn't even work, and it will probably lead to akin to the Con scenario, while the other characters just don't care. But this isn't really about fame, since that this movie isn't really about the characters gaining fame when it comes to the wedding itself. Okay, let's get into the main villain of this movie, Fifi. I really feel like that whenever I look at her character, especially her character design, honestly, I'm supposed to be intimidated that she's supposed to be really messy when it comes to her research involving the Loud family, which does include Lincoln's development. But at the same time, I really feel like that they still had misdirection when it comes to her character for how she's displayed from the beginning and end of this movie. Granted, I'm not going to argue when it comes to her vengeance towards Moto, who caused her husband to go out of Earth and never to come back. But at the same time, her research involving the Loud family for months, even if it may be menacing and really vicious as a villain to do, her execution when it comes to her plans towards Lincoln is supposed to work in a way to make her menacing, but at the same time, with my problems involving Lincoln's character and Moto being a spy, I still can't take her plans seriously. The thing is that with her encountering the Loud family multiple times, especially Lincoln when it comes to his obsession of David Sealy and spy elements, it really feels like there is still a lose-lose situation when it comes to when they arrive on the island, and if Lincoln didn't follow anything when it comes to spy elements and just focus on the family aspect at most, I'm pretty sure that she would still have a different plan entirely by ruining the wedding involving the Loud family, which the main plot of this entire film, when they get on the island, never happened. Like, the thing is that this movie really wants me to see that Lincoln's obsession could go too far, but at the same time, whenever he encounters Fifi, it really feels like that he is really uninterested, to the point that there's no chemistry when it comes to the two. Like, in the Loud Test movie, there was at least some kind of chemistry between Lincoln and Morag, especially when it comes to the climax towards the end of that movie. And when it comes to Fifi in this, even if there's not supposed to be a lot of conflict between her and Lincoln, and her main focus is towards Moto, the way she is handling her plan, I'm starting to convince that if the wedding still happened, she would have just crashed it and just ruined the wedding for literally everyone, including the soon-to-be husband and wife. Let's put this in perspective. What Lincoln did when it comes to getting into these situations would have been something else entirely if the antagonist of the film actually had a lot of communication with him. But considering that Lincoln isn't really interested in the character herself, and whole way of lowering Lincoln and the other family into a trap when it comes to launching them into outer space in the same ways that Margo did with her husband would have been a lot more impactful if we actually see her do more in the plot rather than what we see when it comes to our plans, because there's always a way where a plan could instantly backfire to the point that her lowering the family into the island is one thing, but when it comes to the plan happening on the island, it's difficult to make me feel like Lincoln is really in the wrong when it comes to how he isn't interested in Fifi whatsoever. I'm not expecting a lot, but at the same time, if you're going to introduce a new character who is going to be the antagonist, the very least you will have done is mainly just have her being more involved with the plot instead of just having her appear once in a while, because whenever I look at her as a villain in this movie, she should have gotten more screen time like Moag from the Lounge House movie, and a part of me is supposed to think that she's a better villain than Moag, considering how poorly executed she was due to the plot of the Lounge House movie and the fact that the Lounge House movie is supposed to be non-canon, but at the same time, it's ridiculous to pick which side of this movie being canon or not. But with all these problems in mind, it really makes me feel like that whole plan entirely would have been better off if she just hijacked the wedding and just ruined it for literally everyone. If anything, if there was a communication between her and Lincoln when it comes to chemistry, and the chemistry is mainly having her being in charge of the wedding of some other capacity, which will lead to the wedding being a disaster and Lincoln is mostly responsible with it, then I would honestly see Lincoln's obsession going a little too far rather than the direction that they took, because with the Lounge family being on board with it by getting to their destination to save Margo, I'm really feeling like that literally every single character is being in the position of no going back, considering that they have no other option. To the point that Fifi's plan in general just feels a lot more difficult to be taken seriously, even though that it's supposed to have the Lounge family go into outer space and never return back to the Earth's atmosphere. And my final issue with the character is the fact that there isn't a climax between her and Lincoln. Granted, Margo is her main objective to take down, but considering that the climax just centers around the family being up into outer space, close to outer space, while they need to find ways to bring it down, is one thing. I will get to that soon. But when it comes to how Fifi was executed, when it comes to the final minutes of her screen time, it really makes me feel like that they were going to do something interesting with her character, considering that when she escapes, it really feels like that they're mostly doing sequel baiting by having her return. But at the same time, that also showcases on the fact that they really dropped the ball on doing a climax between her and the main characters in order to make her a lot more menacing, while also showcasing the development of Lincoln on his obsession has gone too far, while also fighting for his family. But then again, he did that in the first movie. Let's get into Flip's cousin, Flop, who helps out the other characters when it comes to driving a limo, to well, it would lead to them convincing that it's actually Flip, but it's actually his cousin. Then again, I could be thinking that he's not the same character by driving the limo, but at the same time, I can care less, because I have less opinions towards Flop in this, considering that they probably wanted to include Flip's cousin because they just like Flip's character so much to the point that they just wanted his cousin to be part of this, even though it just kind of feels a little out of place in some ways. But the reason why I brought him up is mainly the fact that he captured Fifi and his wrestler henchman off screen. Honestly, it would have meant something for Flop's character if we actually see him captured Fifi and his wrestler henchman, but since that we didn't, it just makes Fifi more of an afterthought, considering that we don't get to see her defeat in some of the way, because in the latest movie, we get to see Morak's defeat. So just seeing her being captured off screen, even if it's for good or cause, I just feel like that it just feels awkward to see her being captured off screen when it comes to her being diabolical, when it comes to lowering the Loud family into the island. Granted, it could be debatable if she never lured the Loud family onto the island in some other way, but at the same time, it really feels like the whole plan just feels a lot more difficult to taken seriously when there are different ways for her plan to be a lot more diabolical, which is hijacking the wedding itself. Am I expecting too much for this character? Yes, since that this movie is canon and the Loud Test movie is not, I'm starting to convince that they were planning on making her a lot more menacing, that if she hijacked the wedding, she would have still succeeded her plan by having the family that Marto wants to be part of launched out of Earth. So in all honesty, whenever she could have accomplished her goal, it would have been a lot more better executed when it comes to the elements that I've expressed when it comes to a better plan with a better direction. And with her being a factor when it comes to Lincoln's obsession, honestly, it's one thing for the characters not scolding Lincoln for what he caused, but at the same time, I really feel like that Lincoln would have learned the lesson of not being too obsessed with this hobby a lot more if he actually had a direction. Well, nothing was planned out in a way that if he didn't got his obsession the better of him, then I'm pretty sure that Fifi would still find a different solution. Even if I'm overthinking it a little bit, whenever I think about Lincoln in this movie, he would have done a lot more worse if we actually see him siding with Fifi by taking care of the wedding, all the while having him responsible that all this is happening, that his obsession got way over to his head than what we've seen from this entire movie. And be completely honest, do you really think that the reception of Kings of the Con is the reason why they went to this direction when it comes to Lincoln being obsessed with David Seeley and being a spy? Because, if anything, that was done terribly due to how they're not taking the characters seriously. And whenever they try to take the characters seriously in this movie, I'm starting to convince that if we did had a special or a movie involving A Savvy, then I'm pretty sure it would have been done differently in a way where it just showcases of how much that they wanted to do a special involving A Savvy or a movie, but at the same time, they will probably have a slightly better direction considering that they wouldn't use the lore of the Loud House by having the entire movie taking the place in a comic book rather than a movie involving spies being grounded with reality. The thing is that even if A Savvy isn't the thing that Lincoln isn't into anymore, since that it's been 5 years since Kings of the Con came out, do you really think it will ever come to a point of him just dropping everything that he loves in this movie when it comes to David Seeley? Because I really wanted to feel sympathy towards him when it comes to the position that him and his family are in, but at the same time, when it comes to Kings of the Con, despite what he and Clyde did, he at least told the truth to everyone that they're responsible, to the point that even though that though still mostly in the one for how his sisters were portrayed when it comes to behavior or think about fame and fortune. At the very least, he wouldn't do something like this, since that he still is into A-Savvy, but the problem is that the people who made Kings of the Con didn't took Lincoln or his loud siblings' characters seriously due to how they just don't even care about developing characters and just making everyone in the one, which is really annoying to the point that the only people I see in the one when it comes to criticism is mainly the people watching the episodes, reviewing the episodes, and having the same complaints as before by having the character worse than each other, which, in all honesty, isn't really close sibling relationship, nor Lincoln's hobbies towards A-Savvy, and just makes me feel like that the entire episode full of hatred has literally gone overboard to the point that it just rivals the post-movie episodes of SpongeBob. As for Lincoln sacrificing himself for his family to be rescued, I really wanted to see this as a really great scene when it comes to Lincoln doing the great deed for his family. I really do. Especially for how his family were better directed than how they were from the Loud House movie. But I'm sorry. The biggest problem of what this show has been doing from time to time is mainly making Lincoln in the right when it comes to these decisions by having a proper direction and script in order to make his character accurate. Because every time I look at Lincoln in this, of what the writers and producers are trying to do, they're trying too hard, but at the same time, not trying when it comes to making Lincoln a character that is somewhat relatable in a way of how he was developed in previous seasons. Because as far as I'm concerned, his obsession towards spies and how Marta being a spy somewhat ruins of how she was developed in Season 3, and the plan involving Fifi. In all honesty, it's difficult to see this as one of the greatest Loud House moments in the entire franchise due to these factors just pulling back of what would have made this a lot more heartbreaking. I never said this entire sequence is terrible. Pop saving Lincoln is really great, but at the same time, it doesn't really make up for how poorly directed this entire movie is when it comes to its characters. If you agree with me or not. It really feels like this movie had opportunities that would have been a lot more capitalized, but whenever I think about these issues, it really sums up onto why I'm never a fan of spy elements, or Lincoln being into David Sealy, or basically anything that really makes this way more interested to the point that if I didn't do Summerpalooza 5 Steven Universe Marathon, I still wouldn't have the ability to make this review way ahead of time. The movie itself isn't bad, but it's mediocre at best. To the point that, looking back at the Loud House movie, it really feels like that they still had elements that somehow work, even though that the negatives overweigh the positives. But when it comes to this, the issues overweighing the positives are really difficult to treat them as terrible as the Loud House movie, but at the same time, it doesn't really make any of this any better when it comes to the issues that I have with it. If you found this film enjoyable, that's fine, but at the same time, I just feel like that there could have been better directions that would have made this movie a lot more better, that they would have instantly keep the base itself, what the characters need to go through in order to save Marta, still intact, but at the same time, it would still at least develop Lincoln's character a little bit more, all the while showcasing that Marta not being a spy would have been a lot more better when the main antagonist is focusing on the main character. Granted, Fifi wouldn't be a character when it comes to Marta's backstory of her sending Fifi's husband off from Earth, but in all honesty, that would have been better off if Margo was a different character rather than the character that we've seen from Season 3. If any other ex-Loud House fan watched this movie after giving up the show due to the bad episodes, I don't even think that they will probably take the movie seriously when it comes to the portrayal of Margo of what they missed from Season 6. Because I'm pretty sure they would have the same mindset that I do of what they saw in Margo, of being a spy rather than being a character who is really lonely. Whenever I think about spy elements in this movie, aside from the creators wanting to do a spy movie when it comes to James Bond homages, I honestly thought that this is a way for Nickelodeon to make another spy movie, considering that they've done it multiple times. Granted, it's not the case that Nickelodeon is obsessed with spy elements when it comes to doing this film as a way of making a spy movie, but considering that my original plans that I've stated months ago was to do something special with this movie, and what I was referring to is comparing this movie to the Jimmy Neutron special, Jet Fusion. I didn't watch the Hey Arnold movie in case if you guys are wondering, but my original plans was to compare the Loud House movie, No Time to Spy, to the Jimmy Neutron special, Jet Fusion. The reason why I scrapped it is mainly the fact that I want to focus on the Loud House movie more, because it will probably put too much pressure on comparing its spy elements to this, and the fact that the plots are way more different from each other. But at the same time, whenever I get back into watching Jimmy Neutron, Jet Fusion ends up becoming one of the final things that I've watched before I get burned out from Jimmy Neutron again. And to tell you the truth, comparing this special to the Loud House No Time to Spy movie is a good idea to think about, but thinking about it more, it just kind of shows to me that Jimmy Neutron did the spy elements slightly better, especially since that I'm not really a fan of the spy elements even in Jet Fusion, considering that the main character, Jimmy Neutron, despite being supposed to be a different character entirely than Lincoln Loud, still manages to carry the entire special in a way that really feels convincing, considering it doesn't try too hard to have Jimmy being too obsessed with spy elements that Lincoln was in the Loud House No Time for Spy movie. If anything, it kind of makes me to believe that this entire movie is mainly a way of just making a spy movie by having the elements but not having the proper direction in order to make those elements work out. At times, No Time to Spy is supposed to be a way of showcasing the producers wanting to make a really great spy thriller movie, but at the same time, it also makes me think that Nickelodeon is so obsessed with spy movies and spy elements that people just probably didn't notice, mainly when it came to the other things that they're highly familiar with when it comes to the allegations and other stuff. Granted, this movie got nothing in the way when it comes to the allegations, not counting Chris Savino, because that's a topic that took place in 2017, but the allegations involving the other elements when it comes to Dan Schneider, the sitcoms that he made, I'm pretty sure that people were really focusing on those, to the point that Nick's obsession towards spy elements in movies just feels more of an afterthought, that it's difficult to take Nickelodeon's obsession towards spy elements a thing, considering of how problematic the company is. And when it comes to the production of this movie, I understand the passion of the people who worked on this movie in the same ways as the Loud House movie and the Casa Grande's movie. But at the end of the day, I'm better off focusing on other elements that actually intrigued me rather than the spy elements, because if it is true that they're gonna be making more movies in this franchise, then they better off giving that honor to a different character rather than relying on the same character, since that Lincoln has 2 movies, so I really want to see another character like Luna to have their own movie. Granted, it's not going to work out considering that she isn't popular like Lucy and Lisa, but at the same time, if they did took the risks on making this movie a thing when it comes to spy elements, which didn't work out for me but did work out for other people, then please have a different character take the spotlight rather than having Lincoln taking the spotlight all the time. Him being the main character is one thing, but at the same time, for how he's executed in this movie and in the last movie, I just want to see how the other characters will take the role that can make them better than Lincoln. I'm at least giving them a chance to have them write a loud sibling to be better than Lincoln when it comes to better direction, when it comes to how they can portray them in a more relatable light than how Lincoln was portrayed. Granted, I don't always agree with everyone else's opinions when it comes to Lincoln's life being different than the Loud siblings who have better lives, but at the same time, I'm pretty sure that the life that Lincoln had from the first movie and in this movie really showcases that he'll most likely go back to square one some way, but that's mostly debatable. If it did happen when it comes to him not learning his mistakes, but then again, everything in this entire movie is difficult to root against Lincoln due to the issues that I have with basically Morto and Fifi. But that's all I have to say about this movie. This review was long overdue, but at the same time, it's worth getting it out now than later. And when it comes to me reviewing more of this show and the franchise itself, I don't have any plans on doing Loud House vs. Casagrande material for the following year. I might do a week of doing 5 videos of Loud House vs. Casagrande, but at the same time, it's still low on my list. I am planning possibly of reviewing more episodes from the show, since that there are a few episodes that I do want to talk about. But at the same time, I'm not gonna be putting my full attention on the show like I used to last year, considering that I'm still burned out. Doing less is honestly the best alternative currently when it comes to my point of view of this show. I'm giving this movie a 5.25 out of 10.